You can't be here. Back the vehicle up, now.
Officer, you are blocking my property. I own this building. Move your cruiser.
Yeah? Funny, this is private property, so you're trespassing.
Then you're the one trespassing. Check the deed. Call your
Step
supervisor.
out of the vehicle or I will remove you.
I am unarmed.
Eleanor Vance was 62 years old, though she carried herself with the timeless energy of a woman who had spent 40 years turning raw concrete and steel into skylines. She was a retired architect and real estate developer, a woman whose name was etched on cornerstones across the city. She had woken up that morning in a good mood. The weather was perfect, a crisp 72 degrees with a light breeze coming off the harbor. She was visiting the Meridian, a 12-story luxury mixed-use complex she had designed 15 years ago and still owned outright. She had a meeting with the commercial leasing manager on the ground floor, followed by a lunch with the city council regarding a new zoning ordinance. She turned the Jaguar off the main boulevard and into the private circular drive that led to the VIP parking spots. These spots were clearly marked, reserved for management. There were gold chains blocking them, which could be lowered by a remote control. Eleanor pressed the button on her sun visor. The chain for spot number 1, her spot began to lower. That was when Officer Kyle Miller intervened. Miller was 29 years old, with 3 years on the force and a reputation for being proactive. In police speak, proactive often meant looking for trouble where there wasn't any. He was patrolling the area, which had seen a slight uptick in catalytic converter thefts, and he was bored. When he saw an older black woman driving a convertible worth more than his annual salary turn into the restricted access lane of the city's most exclusive building, his bias kicked in before his brain did. He didn't see an owner. He saw a shortcut. He saw someone trying to bypass traffic, or worse, someone casing the building. He hit his lights and chirped his siren. He whipped his cruiser, a black and white Dodge Charger, right across the entrance of the parking spot, effectively boxing Eleanor in. The nose of his cruiser was inches from the priceless bumper of her Jaguar. Eleanor didn't flinch. She didn't slam on her brakes in panic. She came to a smooth, controlled stop. She looked at the police car blocking her path, then checked her watch. She was 5 minutes early for her meeting. She had time. She turned off the Jaguar's engine but kept her hands on the steering wheel visible and relaxed. She watched Officer Miller exit his vehicle. He adjusted his belt, puffed out his chest, and walked toward her with that distinctive stride of a man who believes he owns the world. He had no idea that the woman he was approaching had actually drawn the property lines for this entire block. He had no idea that the public road he thought he was patrolling ended 10 feet behind him. He was currently standing on private property, disrupting the owner, and about to initiate a confrontation that would be studied in law schools for years to come. Miller approached the driver's side of the convertible. The top was down, so there was no window to roll down. Yet Eleanor remained perfectly still, her eyes hidden behind oversized tortoiseshell sunglasses. She waited for him to speak. It was a power move she had learned in boardroom negotiations in the 1980s, never be the first one to talk. "Ma'am," Miller said, his voice loud enough to carry over the ambient street noise, "you can't park here." Eleanor slowly removed her sunglasses, folding them deliberately and placing them on the passenger seat. She looked Miller in the eye. Her gaze was steady, unimpressed. "Good morning, officer. Is there a reason you are blocking my parking space?" Miller blinked. He wasn't used to that tone. He was used to apologies, excuses, or nervousness. He wasn't used to a 62-year-old woman looking at him like he was a subordinate who had forgotten to file a report. "I said you can't park here," Miller repeated, stepping closer, his hand resting near his belt buckle. "This area is for residents and management only. You need to reverse and get back on the main road. You can't use this driveway to cut through traffic." "I am not cutting through traffic," Eleanor said, her voice calm and articulate, the diction precise. "I am parking in my designated space, spot number 1. If you would kindly move your vehicle, I can proceed." "This is private property, ma'am," Miller said, a smug smile touching his lips, thinking he had caught her in a lie. "That means you're trespassing. I've had complaints about people using this lot to turn around. I need you to back out, now." Eleanor sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. "Officer, you are correct. This is private property. Specifically, it is the property of Vance Development Group, LLC. I am Eleanor Vance. I own this building. I own this parking lot. And I own the spot you are currently obstructing. Now please move your cruiser." Miller laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of a laugh. He looked at the car, a 1972 Jaguar E-Type, pristine condition. He looked at Eleanor, an African-American woman in a silk blouse and linen trousers. In his mind, the math didn't add up. The bias that had been programmed into him by years of bad training and personal prejudice fired all its circuits. "Yeah, okay," Miller said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "And I'm the mayor. Look, lady, I don't have time for fairy tales. You're blocking a fire lane and you're attempting to trespass on private property. I'm giving you a lawful order. Back the vehicle up and leave the premises." "I cannot follow an unlawful order, officer," Eleanor said. "You have no jurisdiction to enforce traffic laws on private property unless a crime is being committed or there is an immediate threat to public safety. I am not speeding. I am not reckless. I am stationary on land that I hold the deed to. The only person trespassing here is you." Miller's face flushed red. He stepped right up to the door of the Jaguar, leaning in, invading her personal space. "You want to play lawyer? Fine. Turn off the car. Give me your license, registration, and proof of insurance, now." "The car is already off," Eleanor noted dryly. "And I am under no obligation to provide identification to you. This is a consensual encounter on private land, and I am terminating it. Please remove your vehicle from my property immediately." "Refusing a lawful order," Miller muttered more to himself than to her. "Okay, we can do this the hard way." "Officer," Eleanor said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming steel, "I am trying to save you from a very expensive mistake. Look at the cornerstone on the building. Read the name. Then look at me. Do not let your assumptions destroy your pension." Miller ignored her. He was too far in now. To back down would be to admit he was wrong, and men like Officer Miller did not admit they were wrong. Not to women, and certainly not to black women. The confrontation had not gone unnoticed. The Meridian was a busy building with a coffee shop on the ground floor and offices above. It was 10:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, and people were coming and going. The sight of a police cruiser aggressively blocking a classic Jaguar and a young white officer looming over a distinguished older black woman drew attention immediately. Sarah Jenkins, a tenant on the 4th floor, who ran a digital marketing firm, had been walking her French bulldog. She stopped 10 feet away. She knew Eleanor. Everyone who lived in the Meridian knew Eleanor. She hosted the annual holiday party in the lobby and sent personal notes when tenants had babies or got married. Sarah pulled out her iPhone and started recording. "Officer," Sarah called out. "Is there a problem? That's Ms. Vance. She owns the building." Miller spun around, pointing a finger at Sarah. "Back up. Back away from the scene. This is an active investigation." "Investigation of what?" Eleanor asked from the car. "Parking in my own spot." "Ma'am, I told you to produce identification," Miller shouted, turning his attention back to Eleanor. He was losing control of the situation, and he knew it. The crowd was growing. A delivery driver stopped. 2 businessmen in suits paused near the entrance. They were watching him, judging him. He felt the heat rising in his neck. "I am declining your request," Eleanor said. "I have committed no crime. You have no reasonable suspicion that a crime has occurred. Driving while black in a nice car is not a crime, officer, despite what you may believe." "You are obstructing a police officer," Miller yelled. His hand dropped to his holster. He didn't draw the weapon, but he unsnapped the retention strap. It was a threat. A clear physical threat. The crowd gasped. Sarah, recording on her phone, narrated the action. "The officer just unsnapped his holster. He is threatening an unarmed 62-year-old woman for sitting in her car. This is insane." Eleanor saw the hand on the holster. Her heart hammered in her chest. She was human after all, and she knew the statistics. She knew how easily this could turn deadly. But she also knew that fear was what he wanted. He wanted her to cower. He wanted her to beg. And Eleanor Vance had never begged for anything in her life. "Officer," Eleanor said, speaking loudly so the witnesses could hear, "I am unarmed. I am not reaching for anything. My hands are on the steering wheel. You are escalating a non-existent situation. I am asking you again to call your supervisor." "I don't need a supervisor to handle a trespasser," Miller snapped. "Last chance. Get out of the car or I will remove you." "On what grounds?" Eleanor asked. "State the statute." "Failure to identify, obstruction, trespassing." Miller rattled them off like a shopping list. "I cannot trespass on my own land," Eleanor said, "and I cannot obstruct an investigation that has no legal basis. You are fabricating charges to cover your own bias. Look at the crowd, officer. Look at the phones. Do you really want this to be the video that plays on the evening news?" Miller looked around. He saw the phones, but in his mind they were just more enemies. He felt cornered. He had convinced himself that she was a fraud, a liar, someone who had stolen the car or was trying to scam him. He couldn't conceive of a world where he was the one in the wrong. "Step out of the vehicle," Miller screamed. "Now!" "I am staying right here," Eleanor said, gripping the steering wheel. "I am waiting for a supervisor." Miller's patience snapped. He reached for the door handle of the Jaguar. It was locked. He reached inside the open convertible top and unlocked it himself. "Officer, do not touch my vehicle," Eleanor warned. "That is a violation of the Fourth Amendment." "Get out!" Miller grabbed Eleanor's left arm. The fabric of her silk blouse bunched under his grip. He yanked. The physical contact changed everything. The moment Officer Miller's hand closed around Eleanor's arm, the threshold from misunderstanding to lawsuit was crossed. It wasn't just a stop anymore. It was an assault. "Let go of me," Eleanor commanded, her voice sharp. She didn't struggle, but she held her body rigid. She knew that pulling away could be interpreted as resisting arrest, giving him the excuse to use a taser or worse. She used her words as her weapon. "You are making a grave error. Unhand me. Get out of the car." Miller hauled her upward. Eleanor was a fit woman, but she was 62, and Miller was a 29-year-old man who spent 5 days a week in the gym. He dragged her out of the low-slung sports car. She stumbled onto the pavement of her own driveway, nearly twisting her ankle in her low heels. "Officer, look at me," Eleanor said, regaining her balance and standing tall, brushing his hand off her arm. "You are currently trespassing on property I own, harassing the owner. If you proceed, you will end your career today. There is no coming back from this. Look at the deed. Call dispatch. Check the license plate properly." "Turn around," Miller barked, spinning her by the shoulder. "Hands behind your back." "You are arresting me?" Eleanor asked, incredulous. "For what? Being successful? Resisting without violence, disobeying a lawful order." Miller recited, pushing her toward the side of the Jaguar. "This is not a lawful order," Sarah shouted from the sidewalk. "She lives here. She owns the place, you idiot. Stop." Miller pointed a finger at Sarah again. "One more word and you're next. Back up." He turned back to Eleanor. "Give me your hands." Eleanor looked him dead in the eye. The fear was gone now, replaced by a cold, righteous anger. "I will comply under duress," she stated clearly for the cameras. "I am not resisting. I am submitting to an unlawful arrest to avoid physical injury. But hear me, Officer Miller. You have just declared war on the wrong woman." Miller grabbed her wrists and pulled them behind her back. The metal handcuffs clicked. The sound was distinct, sharp, and final. Click, click. Eleanor Vance, a pillar of the community, a woman who had donated millions to local libraries and schools, a woman who had literally built the skyline this officer patrolled, stood handcuffed in her own parking lot. Miller patted her down. It was humiliating. He checked her pockets. He found her wallet. He pulled it out and opened it. He saw the driver's license, Eleanor Vance. He saw the credit cards, the Platinum Amex, the black card. Vance, he muttered. He looked at the building. The Meridian, managed by Vance Development. A flicker of doubt crossed his eyes, just for a second, but he squashed it. No, he told himself. She probably just has the same last name. Maybe she's a relative, or maybe the ID is fake. He had come too far to stop. If he uncuffed her now, he'd look weak. He'd look incompetent. He had to book her. He had to make the charges stick. "You're under arrest," he said, his voice lacking the conviction it had 2 minutes ago. He grabbed her arm and marched her toward his cruiser. "What about my car?" Eleanor asked. "You cannot leave it blocking the driveway." "It's being towed," Miller said. "Impounded, abandoned in a fire lane." "It is not a fire lane," Eleanor corrected him. "It is a private easement." "Tell it to the judge," Miller said. He opened the back door of his Charger and shoved her inside. The hard plastic seat was uncomfortable. The cage smelled of stale sweat and disinfectant. Eleanor sat upright, her posture perfect, even with her hands cuffed behind her. She closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and began drafting the legal complaint in her mind. Miller got into the driver's seat. He picked up his radio. "Dispatch show 1 in custody, 10:15, requesting a tow for a vehicle blocking a fire lane at 400 Harborview Drive." "Copy, 10:15, the dispatcher crackled back. "Tow truck is en route." Outside, the crowd was in an uproar. Sarah was still filming, narrating the license plate of the police car, the time of day, and the badge number she had zoomed in on. "Officer Miller badge 492, she said into her phone. "He just arrested Eleanor Vance at her own building. This is going to be huge." Inside the cruiser, Miller pulled away. He drove slowly past the Jaguar, looking at it with disdain. He felt a twinge of anxiety in his gut. The way she spoke. It wasn't the way people usually spoke to him. It was too precise, too confident. "You comfortable back there?" he asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. He was fishing. He wanted her to scream, to curse, to give him something he could use to justify his actions. Eleanor met his eyes in the mirror. "I am perfectly fine, officer. I am simply calculating the billable hours my legal team is going to charge the city for this. It is currently accumulating at a rate of $500 every 10 minutes. Miller scoffed. "You think you're special, huh?" "I think I am a citizen with rights that you have flagrantly violated," Eleanor replied. "You profiled me. You saw a black woman in a Jaguar and assumed criminal. You didn't run the plates first, did you? Because if you had, you would have seen the vehicle is registered to the address we were standing at." Miller didn't answer. He hadn't run the plates. He had just reacted. "You also didn't check the property records," Eleanor continued, "which are public domain. You are operating on instinct, Officer Miller, and your instincts are bigoted." "Watch your mouth," Miller warned. "Or I'll add disorderly conduct to the list." "You can add whatever you like," Eleanor said calmly. "Paperwork is just paper. Evidence is what matters. And there were 6 cameras on that building, officer. 4 of them belong to me. 2 of them have audio. I have everything recorded from multiple angles. The moment you touched me, you sealed your fate." Miller gripped the steering wheel tighter. His knuckles were white. He turned up the radio to drown her out. He needed to get her to the station. He needed to process her and be done with it. He tried to convince himself he was right. She was arrogant, he thought. She deserved to be taken down a peg. Nobody is above the law. But deep down, the cold knot of dread in his stomach was growing. He remembered the crowd. He remembered the woman filming. He remembered the name on the building. Vance. He pulled onto the highway heading toward the 4th Precinct. He didn't know it, but he was driving toward his own professional funeral. Eleanor watched the city pass by through the barred window. She saw the skyline she had helped shape. She saw the courthouse where she had sat on zoning boards. She wasn't afraid. She was focused. She was a builder, and right now she was planning the demolition of Officer Miller's career. The rest of the ride was silent. Miller drove with aggressive, jerky movements, changing lanes unnecessarily, displaying his agitation. Eleanor sat swaying slightly with the motion of the car, her face a mask of stone. She wasn't just thinking about the lawsuit anymore. She was thinking about the implications. If he did this to her, a woman with resources, connections, and status, what was he doing to the teenagers in her neighborhood? What was he doing to the single mothers working double shifts? This wasn't just about a parking spot. It was about the system that allowed a man like Miller to wear a badge. They arrived at the precinct. Miller pulled into the sally port, the garage door clattering shut behind them. He hauled Eleanor out of the car. "Watch your head," he said, purely out of habit. "Do not pretend to care about my safety now," Eleanor said coldly. He walked her into the processing area. It was a busy morning. Phones were ringing, officers were typing reports, and the smell of stale coffee hung in the air. At the main booking desk sat Sergeant Thomas Kowalski. Kowalski was 58 years old, a career cop who had seen it all. He was 2 years away from retirement and spent most of his days shaking his head at the stupidity of the rookies. He was typing away at a report when Miller walked in, gripping Eleanor's arm. "Got a 10-15, Miller announced, puffing out his chest. "Trespassing, failure to ID resisting." Kowalski looked up over his reading glasses. He saw Miller. Then he looked at the prisoner. His eyes went wide. He stopped chewing his gum. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Miller," Kowalski said, his voice low and dangerous. "What are you doing?" "Booking a prisoner, Sarge," Miller said, confused by the reaction. "She refused to leave a private lot. Wouldn't ID, caused a scene." Kowalski walked around the desk. He didn't look at Miller. He looked at Eleanor. "Ms. Vance," Kowalski asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "Hello, Sergeant," Eleanor said politely. "I believe we met at the policeman's ball 3 years ago. I was presenting the award for community service." "Yes," Kowalski said. "Yes, we did. And you were the city planning commissioner. You approved the budget for the renovation of this precinct. You signed the check for the new locker rooms." "I did," Eleanor nodded. "And currently I am in handcuffs because Officer Miller here believes I was trespassing at the Meridian." Kowalski turned his gaze slowly to Miller. It was a look of pure pity mixed with fury. "Miller?" Kowalski said softly. "The Meridian, who owns the Meridian?" "I don't know, some company." Miller shrugged, starting to sweat. "Vance Development or something." "Vance?" Kowalski repeated. He pointed at Eleanor. "Vance." Miller looked at Eleanor, then at the sergeant, then back at Eleanor. The color drained from his face. It didn't just fade. It vanished, leaving him looking gray and sickly. She owns it," Miller stammered. "She owns half the damn district, you moron," Kowalski roared. The entire room went silent. Every officer stopped what they were doing. "You arrested the owner of the property for trespassing on her own property." "She wouldn't show ID," Miller protested weakly. "She was uncooperative." "She doesn't have to show you jack squat on her own land without a warrant or probable cause," Kowalski yelled. "Get those cuffs off her. Now." Miller's hands were shaking so badly he couldn't get the key into the handcuffs. Kowalski shoved him aside. "Get away from her. Go to the captain's office. Don't speak to anyone. Don't touch anything. Just go." Kowalski gently unlocked the cuffs. Eleanor rubbed her wrists. There were red marks where the metal had dug in. "Ms. Vance, I am so sorry," Kowalski said, his face red with embarrassment for his department. "I don't know what to say. This is unacceptable." "It is, Sergeant," Eleanor said, massaging her wrist. "But apologies will not fix this. I have been kidnapped by a uniformed officer. My vehicle has been illegally towed, and I have been publicly humiliated." Just then, the door to the inner offices flew open. Captain Harrison, the precinct commander, came storming out. He had already received a phone call. Sarah's video had been uploaded to Twitter 20 minutes ago. It already had 10,000 views. The mayor's office had just called him. "Ms. Vance." Captain Harrison rushed over. "Please come into my office. Let's get you some water. Let's sit down." "I prefer to stand, Captain," Eleanor said. "And I do not want water. I want the incident report number. I want the body camera footage secured immediately. I want the dash cam footage. And I want the name and badge number of the officer who arrested me written down on official letterhead." "We can handle this internally." Captain Harrison tried sweating. "We can drop all charges right now. It was a misunderstanding. We'll get your car back immediately. No charge." "There are no charges to drop, Captain, because there was no crime," Eleanor said, her voice echoing in the silent room. "And you will not handle this internally. This will be handled in federal court. I am filing a civil rights lawsuit under Section 1983 for false arrest, excessive force, and violation of my 4th and 14th Amendment rights." She looked over at Miller, who was standing by the door looking like a ghost. "And I want him drug tested," Eleanor added. "His behavior was irrational and aggressive. Standard procedure for an officer involved in a liability incident, correct?" Captain Harrison sighed. He knew he was beaten. "Yes, ma'am. That is procedure." "Good," Eleanor said. "I am leaving now. Do not call me a ride. My attorney is already outside. I expect my car to be returned to my residence within the hour detailing. If there is a single scratch on it, you will be buying me a new one." She turned and walked out of the precinct. She didn't look back. Her wrists hurt, her shoulder ached, and she was exhausted, but her head was high. She walked out the double doors to find her attorney, a sharp-suited man named Marcus, waiting by his sedan. "You okay, Elle?" Marcus asked, opening the door for her. "I'm angry, Marcus," she said, getting in. "I'm very angry, but I'm going to turn that anger into something useful. Let's go." The lawsuit was filed 48 hours later. Vance v. City of New York and Officer Kyle Miller. It was a masterpiece of legal drafting. It didn't just allege misconduct. It proved it frame by frame. The video Sarah had taken went viral globally. Millions of people watched Officer Miller smirk and tell the owner of the building she was trespassing. They watched him put his hand on his gun. They watched him drag a 62-year-old woman out of her car. The comment sections were brutal. "Cop blocks owner from her own spot. He picked the wrong one today. The calmness of this woman is legendary." The internal affairs investigation was swift because there was no way to drag it out. The evidence was overwhelming. Miller's body camera footage showed Eleanor calmly stating she owned the property 3 separate times. It showed Miller ignoring her, mocking her, and escalating the situation without cause. Officer Kyle Miller was fired 3 weeks later. The union didn't even fight for him. The public outcry was too loud and his actions were indefensible. He was stripped of his pension. His certification was revoked, meaning he could never work as a police officer in the state again. The city settled the lawsuit 6 months later. They knew they would lose in front of a jury. They offered $1.2 million. Eleanor accepted, but not for herself. She stood on the steps of City Hall for the press conference. She looked regal, dressed in a white suit. "I did not fight this battle for the money," Eleanor told the bank of microphones. "I have money. I fought this because if this can happen to me, a woman who owns the block, who knows the laws, who has resources, imagine what happens to those who do not. Imagine the young men and women who are bullied, arrested, and ruined by officers like Kyle Miller every day simply because they cannot fight back." She held up the check. "This entire amount, $1.2 million, is being used to establish the Vance Legal Defense Fund. We will provide top-tier legal representation for property owners and tenants in minority communities who face police harassment. We will hold them accountable. Every single time." The crowd cheered. Eleanor returned to the Meridian later that day. She drove her Jaguar, which had been returned without a scratch. She pulled into the circular drive. She pressed the button on her visor. The chain for spot number 1 lowered. She parked the car. She turned off the engine. She sat there for a moment in the silence. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the pavement. It was just a parking spot, a slab of concrete, but it represented something more. It represented her work, her life, and her right to exist in a space she had built. Officer Miller was gone. The system had been forced to work, albeit reluctantly, but Eleanor knew the work wasn't done. She got out of her car, locked the door, and walked into her building, the sound of her heels clicking rhythmically on the ground she owned. Have you ever dealt with someone who refused to admit they were wrong, even when the evidence was right in front of them? How did you handle it? Drop your stories in the comments below. I read every single one, and if this story resonated with you, please like and share it. Helps us keep telling the stories that matter. Stay safe and know your rights.